A man is hunted across a city and killed on his own birthday. Days later, the woman who helped set it up walks into court, laughing and fixing her makeup like nothing happened. Julio Foolio is 26 when gunmen ambush him in a Tampa parking lot and unload rounds into his car. He never stands a chance. Prosecutors say she tracks him all night, feeding his location until there's nowhere left to run.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1. The defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense.
To understand why Alicia Andrews was sitting in that courtroom, you first have to understand who Charles Julio Foolio Jones was, and what his life actually looked like long before the music, the fame, and the night that ended everything. Charles grew up in Moncrief, a Jacksonville neighborhood that doesn't make the travel brochures. Violence wasn't a backdrop there. It was a daily reality. He was 13 years old when his father was shot and killed. 13. Before he was even old enough to drive, he'd already watched his best friend's mother get shot by her own boyfriend. And in 2017, his cousin Zion was murdered, a killing that prosecutors would later point to as the spark that ignited the gang war that would eventually consume Foolio himself. But Charles didn't collapse under all of that. He turned it into music. He started rapping under the name Julio Foolio, and tracks like Voodoo and When I See You weren't just songs. They were survival journals set to a beat. Millions of views. A real fan base. Albums called Life of Me, Final Destination, and Resurrection. Titles that, looking back now, feel like a man who always knew his clock was running. The streets never let him forget where he came from either. He'd been shot in Houston, shot in Jacksonville, survived threats that would have broken most people completely. He survived all of it. But this time, his enemies didn't leave anything to chance. If you're into true crime stories like this, hit subscribe now and stay with me, because what happened that day changes everything forever. June 21st, 2024, Julio Foolio turned 26 and he wanted to celebrate. So he did what a lot of people with a following do. He took it to Tampa, posted about it openly, and invited the world to pull up. Pool party starting at 5 or 6. DM him for the address. Come through. That was the energy. No filter, no hesitation, just a young man who'd survived so much already and finally felt like he could breathe for a minute. The party started at a rented Airbnb, packed and loud, exactly the kind of night it was supposed to be. Then the police showed up and shut it down. So Foolio and his crew did what you do. They relocated. They moved to the Home 2 Suites Hotel near the University of South Florida on McKinley Drive, determined to keep the night alive. Nobody in that group had any reason to believe the worst was still ahead of them. But 2 cars were already moving through Tampa that night with a completely different agenda. Inside one of them was Isaiah Chance, street name Gooday, a 21-year-old member of ATK, which stood directly opposed to Foolio's 6-block set. These 2 gangs had been drawing blood from each other for years, and Chance hadn't driven 200 miles from Jacksonville just to watch Foolio celebrate. And sitting right beside him was his girlfriend, Alicia Andrews. No gang card, no criminal record, just a young woman who knew exactly how to blend in without raising a single red flag. That was the point. While Foolio was ordering drinks and laughing with his boys, Alicia was watching every move he made, tracking every location his crew stopped at, and feeding that information straight back to the people who needed it most. Here's where this story takes a turn that's hard to wrap your head around. Alicia Andrews was not a gang member. She had no affiliation with ATK, no criminal history, no weapons on her. On paper, she looked like exactly what her defense team would later argue she was, just a young woman who happened to be with her boyfriend that night. And that's precisely why she was so valuable. Because nobody was watching her.
Avion's in the video, you see him smoking and puffing, and Alicia wants to say something, but she can't.
while Isaiah Chance and the rest of the crew risked being recognized. These were Jacksonville street figures in a city where Foolio had fans and eyes everywhere. Alicia moved freely. She used her own phone, her own car. No flags, no heat, no reason for anyone to look twice. And across that entire night, she followed Foolio's group to at least 3 separate locations around Tampa. Clubs, venues, every stop his crew made before they finally landed at that hotel. Her phone was telling the whole story the entire time. Cell tower data placed her in direct proximity to Foolio throughout the night, physically tracking his movements block by block. Surveillance cameras caught her vehicle circling his parked cars, not once but twice, right there at the Home 2 suites before anything happened. License plate readers logged her presence, and when investigators got into her phone records, they found deleted texts and Instagram activity showing she'd been monitoring Foolio's social media in real time, following his public posts and relaying movements to the group. The prosecution laid it out simply and directly. Those 3 gunmen who came from Jacksonville didn't know Tampa. They didn't know the streets, the hotels, the club routes, or where Foolio's crew would end up at 4 in the morning. Without Alicia Andrews feeding them that information in real time, they were driving around a strange city with rifles and no target. She didn't need a weapon. She was the weapon. And the most chilling part is just how coolly and quietly she played that role, while a man celebrated the last night of his life. By the time Foolio and his crew pulled into the Home 2 suites on McKinley Drive, the night had already been long. The Airbnb was gone, the party had moved twice, and at nearly 5 in the morning, all anyone wanted was to get inside and rest. It was supposed to be the quiet end to a birthday celebration, just a parking lot, just a hotel, just a few more steps to the door. At 4:38 a.m., 3 masked men step out of a vehicle in that parking lot. What happened in the minutes that followed was not a confrontation, not an argument, not some heat-of-the-moment clash. It was an ambush, the kind that had been planned, tracked, and coordinated across an entire night. The kind where the people on the receiving end never got a single second to react. The cars Foolio and his friends were in absorbed a ferocious wave of gunfire. A Glock with an extended magazine, AR-style rifles with brass catchers attached to avoid leaving shell casings behind. Over 30 rounds from that handgun alone. They came prepared to make sure no one walked away. Everyone in those cars was hit. 3 people survived with injuries, 1 didn't. Charles Jones, Julio Foolio, was struck multiple times and died right there in that Tampa parking lot. 2 days removed from his birthday. 2 days past a celebration that was supposed to mark another year of life. The shooters fled into the early morning darkness, wiping down vehicles, covering tracks, moving like people who'd already thought through the aftermath. By 4:40 a.m., Tampa police were on scene responding to 911 calls. And the investigation that followed, the phone records, the surveillance footage, the license plate data, was about to pull Alicia Andrews directly into the center of all of it.
My detectives are working day in and day out on this case. They're developing some good leads. We're working closely with Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. We're working with our statewide prosecutor, our federal partners, the ATF and the FBI, and our local prosecutor, Susie Lopez. And I can guarantee you that we're going to be following up and making arrests in that case.
Tampa detectives didn't have to start from scratch. The evidence was already there. It just needed to be pulled together, and once it was, it formed a trail so clear it was almost like the suspects had mapped it out themselves. Ballistics tied shell casings recovered from that parking lot to prior gang-related incidents, connecting this attack to a war that had been running long before that June night. Surveillance footage from the hotel and surrounding areas captured Alicia Andrews' vehicle making 2 slow passes by Foolio's parked cars before the shooting. Not lost, not passing through, just watching and confirming. Phone records reconstructed the entire convoy's journey, tower by tower, from Jacksonville all the way down to Tampa, showing exactly when each suspect arrived, where they went, and how their movements lined up with Foolio's throughout the night. By late July 2024, law enforcement moved. Andrews, Isaiah Chance, and Sean Gathright were arrested in Jacksonville. The net was closing fast. Rashad Murphy was picked up shortly after, but his brother Davian ran and stayed on the run for 6 months before authorities finally caught up with him too. When the dust settled, all 5 faced the same charges: premeditated first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The state even began weighing whether to pursue the death penalty for the most culpable among them. These weren't people accidentally swept up in someone else's crime. Prosecutors made clear from day one that every single one of them made a choice, and now every single one of them would answer for it. Alicia Andrews' trial opened in Tampa in October 2025, and from the jump, both sides came in with completely different versions of the same woman. The defense painted her as someone who never had a real choice. They argued that Isaiah Chance was physically abusive, hitting her, breaking her phones, controlling what she wore and what she posted online. Their argument was that she joined that Tampa trip hoping to patch things up with her boyfriend, not realizing she was walking into the middle of a murder plot.
Davion's in the video, you see him smoking and puffing, and Alicia wants to say something, but she can't. She won't say anything. Not because she was trying to hide herself. She didn't say anything because she was scared.
She testified that she never saw any weapons, never heard anyone discussing a plan to target Foolio, and only found out about the shooting later through social media. According to her attorneys, she was just a scared young woman who happened to be in the wrong place, sitting next to the wrong man, on the worst possible night. The prosecution wasn't buying a single word of it. They walked the jury through her phone records, her deleted texts, her Instagram activity, and the surveillance footage of her car circling that hotel parking lot. And then they brought out something that stopped the room cold. A text message Alicia Andrews sent at 17 years old that said, plainly and directly, that Foolio needed to die.
You wrote that Foolio needed to die.
Yeah, but I didn't mean it. Literally, I'm 17 just gossiping.
The exhibit where Alicia, at 17 years old, says that Julio needs to die. Did you locate this text message?
Not implied, not taken out of context, written out. That one exhibit alone told a story the defense couldn't undo with testimony about abuse or fear. And then there was how she actually behaved inside that courtroom. Alicia sat through her own murder trial, laughing, putting on makeup, and carrying herself like the proceedings were an inconvenience. Her attorneys were doing the same, laughing, making faces, treating the whole thing like a performance. It got bad enough that the judge stopped the trial mid-session and addressed it directly, telling the defense that the faces and the behavior had been going on throughout the entire trial, and that everything had been caught on camera. The defense wanted the jury to see a terrified young woman caught up in something beyond her control. But the jury had already seen the surveillance footage, and those two things could not exist in the same reality. Before we get to that verdict, I need to hear from you. A man was hunted down on his own birthday, and the woman who tracked his every move sat in court laughing about it. Did the jury get this right, or did Alicia Andrews walk away too easy? Drop your honest opinion in the comments right now and share this video, because Foolio's family deserves for this story to be told.
Young and Ace has long been known in Jacksonville. We are consistently monitoring those groups. We have people that are always watching them. I won't speak to the chief's investigation. That's up to TPD. We don't have an investigation on him right now, but he can't move around in Jacksonville without us knowing about it. And that's for the betterment of our community.
October 31st, 2025. 8 days of testimony, surveillance footage, phone records, and competing narratives. And now it all came down to 12 people in a Tampa jury box. The verdict came back, and the courtroom heard it clearly. Guilty, but not of first-degree murder, not of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge that carried a maximum of 15 years, not a life sentence, not the full weight of what prosecutors had spent 8 days arguing she deserved. The reaction was immediate. People who had followed this case, who had watched the surveillance footage of her car circling that parking lot, who had heard about that text message she sent at 17, they were furious. A man was hunted across an entire city, ambushed in a parking lot, and killed on his birthday, and the most Alicia Andrews was facing was 15 years. And just like that, the laughter was gone. The makeup, the smirking, the casual indifference that had defined her presence in that courtroom for 8 straight days, all of it evaporated the moment that verdict landed. Whatever she thought was going to happen, this wasn't it. Sentencing was scheduled for December 8, 2025. Then her attorneys successfully moved to have the original judge removed, citing alleged bias, and the whole timeline got pushed back with no new date confirmed. As of early 2026, Alicia Andrews still hasn't been sentenced, and the clock is still running.
The defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense. We, the jury, find as follows: as to count 2, the defendant is not guilty. So say we all, dated this 31st day of October 2025, signed foreperson of the jury.
Alicia Andrews may have her verdict, but this story is nowhere close to finished. Isaiah Chance, Sean Gathright, and Rashad Murphy are all still sitting behind bars, tentatively scheduled to stand trial in April 2026. Davian Murphy doesn't even have a firm court date yet. Every single one of them has been denied bond, and the judge didn't mince words about why, citing a substantial probability that releasing any of them would put more lives at risk. The death penalty is still on the table for some of the defendants, and prosecutors are still building a case anchored in surveillance footage, phone data, and a trail of movements that stretches from Jacksonville all the way to that Tampa parking lot. Meanwhile, Charles Jones was buried at Edgewood Cemetery on July 6, 2024, less than 2 weeks after that night. His mother, Sandrikas Mays, had begged him publicly to walk away from the streets after previous attempts on his life. She saw what was coming, she said it out loud, and she still had to bury her son at 26. The trials ahead will be longer, heavier, and more complicated, but none of it brings him back.
But I know that it won't stop, truthfully, but I would want it to stop. Of course, as a mom, that's my only son. It's hard or whatever, but like I say, I'm glad that justice has prevailed.
There are few things this story makes impossible to ignore. Alicia Andrews had a child. She had a life outside of Isaiah Chance and everything he was tied to. And somewhere along the way, she made a choice. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or something else entirely, that is now going to define every year she has left. Whatever the sentence ends up being, she will never get back what she traded away that night. Foolio's story isn't a cautionary tale about fame or rap music. It's about what happens when the life you're trying to celebrate and the life you can't escape exist in the same zip code, and eventually find each other on the same night. And Alicia Andrews laughed through 8 days of trial. She smirked. She fixed her makeup. She acted like none of it could touch her. It touched her. It always does. Isaiah Chance, Sean Gathright, and the Murphy brothers still have their day in court coming, and when those trials start moving in 2026, you'll want to already be here. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it when that story breaks, because something tells me those trials are going to be even heavier than this one.
This barrage of gunfire also struck 3 additional victims who miraculously survived this incident. Let's look at this video. This is at the hotel. And you can see the shooters are getting in position for their planned out murder. And they are shooting at Charles now, and you can see that he's the passenger in that car that's moving and trying to flee. And again, they're still shooting at him. He's the right front passenger in that vehicle. It's clear from that video what they were set out to do and what they had planned to do. The investigation would later reveal that the three armed shooters were Sean Gaithright, Rashard Murphy, and Davion Murphy. Detectives used footage from the scene, license plate readers, and phone logs to identify two vehicles and link them back to the suspects.